So welcome to the Politics of Development podcast. Today we're going to be talking about policy and legislative processes. Every time we talk about governance, people are always asking, what does policy mean? What does the whole legislative process, what is it about? It's technical, it's not easy to understand. And for me, as a newcomer or as someone aspiring to enter politics, it's crucial that you understand policy and legislative processes. So I guess the question is, what is policy? And policy is a deliberate system of principles, or if you like, guidelines that guide the decisions of government. It helps government to achieve a rational outcome. So this is what you hear: the government policy on education, the government policy on health, the government policy on whatever it is created to address a public issue and guide actions towards solving those issues or getting the desired goals. So this is what policy is about, is government decisions usually used to solve a societal problem. So for example, we have the school feeding program. The school feeding program, I'm sure everybody knows about it. This is where the federal government is feeding students or pupils, I beg your pardon, from across the 774 local governments. If you're listening to me from Nigeria, it is a program that was brought in. But then the question is why? Why did they bring that program in? So every policy, you probably want to ask, what is the purpose? Is usually going to be to address a specific problem or issue or, something that is bothering society. In this case, for the school feeding, children were not doing well in school, children were not going to school, and all of that. And so the federal government decided to put the school feeding program whereby children were going to be given meals every day in school, 1 meal a day, and that was going to help them to study better, to stay in schools, and to perform better academically. And so every policy usually will have a purpose. There's a reason behind why you have a government policy. Usually they are written because ultimately they have to disseminate it to the public, and the public needs to understand that this is now the policy that government has formed. This is what government wants to do, and that's very important. And then you have policy at different levels. When you call it public policy, it means it's government policy, as it were. Organizations have policy, of course, and different other bodies also have policy. But the key point is to understand that this policy is the decision of government to solve a particular societal need, and it comes in different forms. Now, the other thing that I want to stress on the policy point that people need to get to terms with, it obviously is about solving problems and children not learning due to hunger. What was the goal? The goal was to feed them, to improve their learning, and to encourage their participation in schools, to ensure that they're going to schools. Another thing about policy is how is it implemented, because sometimes you have very good policy, but they're not very well implemented. And so in this case, government was going to work with food vendors, was going to work with farmers, was going to work with the private sector, logistics companies, to ensure that food is it reaches the destination it needs to get to. And then the last thing about policy, there must be evaluation mechanisms so that we can tell, is this policy really working? Is it good? Is it well received? And government will do well to bring other members of society, like civil society, like NGOs, to act as partners in making sure government is delivering the best to its people. So those are things that are important about policy. Understanding is written, it's from government, and it has a lot of these components. A lot of policy obviously would depend on the agenda or the setting where it's being made. The process of formulation would differ. Usually people would ask, of course, based on data, based on what empirical data that has shown over the years, or real data that these are where the challenges are. The other thing is that whenever you're going to bring out policy, you have to remember This is government, so there are always going to be stakeholders. There are going to be policymakers, of course, legislators, those in the executive, the civil servants, the bureaucrats that are going to be the workforce or the implementers of this, the interest groups, civil society groups, lobbyist groups, the media, the general public. These are all stakeholders, and their role is important if you're going to get policy to work. Obviously, it comes with its own challenges, and that comes with it. Government is always dealing with what we call wicked problems. And what that means is that there are several problems per time that government has to deal with. Just as it's dealing with education, it's dealing with healthcare, it's dealing with all of these things together. So it has to balance competing interests. There's not enough money to run everything per time. And if you use the school feeding program, for example, money to run it, food prices are increasing, the vendors have their own challenges, and all of these things are things that affect the policy formulation process and the implementation to ensure that you have the type of results that you want. Obviously, there will be challenges of theft, corruption, and all of these other things that we usually face. But a government that is determined must ensure that it gives absolute, if you like, best and attention to ensure that the implementation of every policy that is made is done properly. And like I've said before, it's always good to collaborate with other sectors of society so you can measure success, you can measure impact, you can know how many children are being fed, you can know if that is increasing attendance in school, if it's getting them better results, and these are all very important things. So I'm going to hold it there on policy, but understanding policy is crucial for anyone entering politics because it is the primary tool through which governments effect change. You know, governments effect changes by releasing policies, by making policies that will address societal issues. And if you're a young aspiring politician, you will be involved in creating these policies, in implementing these policies, in evaluating these policies, and therefore this requires you understand deeply how policies are made, how they are formed, and why they are formed, when they should be formed, how to form them, and the process behind it. And obviously the possible impact that these different policy choices will matter. It should be based on data, it should mean well for the people, and it should get things done. So I'm going to quickly talk about the process of legislation, which is another part that people feel is very technical, it's totally out of place, people don't understand it. How do you make laws? You know, who makes the laws and who makes the bills and all of that. And I'll just say very quickly that there are three types of bills, but two are more common. The first is what we call the executive bills, which are the bills that come from the executive. So at the federal level, that is coming from the president. At the state level, it's coming from the governor. When I say from the governor, I mean from the executive. The governor signs the letter to the to the state assembly, and the president signs the letter, but would have gone through the Ministry of Justice and other departments and agencies within government. So they get the bill to the House if it is an executive bill. There is also the bill that a lawmaker that is representing the people can also raise on the floor of the House. And that is another way of introducing a bill. The third bill is what we call the public bill or public members bill, whereby people in the public can decide to raise bills, but we know it's not very common in our climes. And so usually most of the bills we have are executive bills and bills that are raised by the members of the House of Assembly or the National Assembly. And so how does it work? What is the process? So usually there's a first reading. So at the first reading, all you just do is you're introducing the bill. So you read the title of the bill, and the speaker or the authority, or whoever is in charge, reads the bill and says the bill has been read for the first time, and bangs the gavel, bam, bill read for the first time. That's it. There's no debate, there's no conversation around it. the only thing is done is it has been brought to the attention of the assembly or the parliament that the bill is going to go through the other stages. And so the first reading is done. In very rare cases, and it's not usually encouraged, people will decide to have the first and second reading at the same time. But usually there should be time for lawmakers to be able to study the bill that has just been introduced to the House or the National Assembly. The second reading is the place where now the lawmakers have a bit more information, and then the sponsor of the bill leads the debate, as we call it, on the floor of the House. So he tells us why the bill is here, what the bill is doing, or what the bill seeks to achieve, and what it's about. If it's an executive bill, which comes from the executive side of government, then the majority leader or the leader of the House introduces the bill on behalf of the executive. But if it's any other type of bill, the lawmaker will tell you why the bill is coming, what it's supposed to solve, what the plans are, and what changes it's going to make. Now, because all the other lawmakers have had the chance to read, then we go into a debate, and then we probably make proposals on how it can get better, or we can argue why we don't need it. And the debate is hard. And at the end of the debate, there is a question that is asked by the Speaker, if it's the Assembly or the House of Reps, and the Senate President, if the bill should be moved forward. If he gets a majority vote saying yes, he will commit it either to the committee or to the relevant committee, and sometimes that's a joint committee. So if it's an education matter, it might refer it to the Chairman Committee on Education. If it's a health matter, it will refer it to the Health Committee, because the House or the Parliament works in committees. There is no way that the Parliament, all of them will sit to discuss every bill. So the Parliament is broken into committees that can give it the attention and the required research that is required. So it goes into the committee stage, and then it goes off. Sometimes when we feel the bill has extreme public interest at heart, so to say, or it is something that might be controversial, or it is something that requires getting to hear from the public, then we have what we call a public hearing. And the public hearing is when the House invites the public, key stakeholders, to come, and it tells them about the bills, and then it takes inputs from the public. So that way the public can also get involved in lawmaking through public hearings. And as I said, they're usually for, if you like, milestone laws or laws that are very significant, landmark laws. And so that's how it works. At the end of it, it goes to the committee. The committee has a thorough look and then comes back to the House. And then the bill is read for a third time, this time with amendments and all the other things that have been done. And then the House breaks into what we call the Committee of the Whole, where all of us sit, because now it was committee that did the work. But for the work to be seen as the work of the House, we break into what we call the Committee of the Whole. So now it's no more the committee's bill, it is back to the House bill. And then the House will agree that this bill should be passed. It is passed and then sent to the executive. In this case, in the state level, it's the governor. At the federal, is the president, and then he puts his presidential accent or the governor's accent on it, and at which time it becomes law. Obviously, there are several exceptions. If the governor doesn't sign, the president doesn't sign, that will usually be determined by the Constitution. What happens? Can the lawmakers override the governor if he doesn't sign, and all of that? But that's usually contained in different constitutions about that. Once the bill is signed, it becomes law. It is gazetted so members of the public can see it. And immediately after that, the House of Assembly or the National Assembly that made the law, that gave the executive the right to implement the law, retains the right to oversight, or what we call oversight, or to oversee how the law is being used by the executive. So the purpose of oversight, which is one of the key components of legislators, is to go and check, is the law being followed? Are things being done properly? Is the budget that is usually backing a lot of these laws, are they being spent properly? And obviously we have what we also call judicial review, which is where you ask the courts to review a law for you. I've tried to summarize what can be seen as very complex a topic, but I hope you understand the very basics on how the legislative process works. You need to remember that good policy making and good legislative processes requires careful research. It requires stakeholder consultation. It requires considering the different views of people, and obviously continuous evaluation and adjustments. And that's why you can have amendments to bills and amendments to policy. Lawmaking, policy making is a dynamic process, and it requires vision, it requires pragmatism, it requires us to broaden our knowledge and understand that society is made up of all of us. And so this is what you must understand as you aspire to come into politics and to come into governance, that there is a role or there is a need to understand the process of making policy and making legislation.